Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, and me, Greg the Single Guy. We are recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you join us.
Welcome to ITP, and I'm here with Greg the Single Guy, and my name is JP Mint, also known as JP, and Jacqueline. And I am so excited to introduce to the world of podcasts my mentor, my favorite administrator in the world I've ever worked for, Keith Boniface, is with us here today. Keith, hi.
Hi,
Hi, so
Keith.
good to be here. That's very flattering, Jacqueline. Thank you very much.
And I can only say that I'm very sad for our listeners because they may never get the opportunity to work with you, because I think you are now on your 7th retirement. So at this point, you may have actually hung up your interim head of school or interim high school hats, and you might actually be retired. Is that right?
Well, mostly right. If someone I thought about this today. If someone asked me to be an interim high school principal, I would, definitely think about that because that was just a really great experience in Amman, Jordan. So, and it's something that I wished I had had when I was first started out as an administrator, was having somebody that, knew the ropes fairly well and could help guide you along. Because many administrators are just, you will go from the classroom to the principal's office, and that's quite a challenge. Yeah.
So, listeners, you heard it here. You might get the honor and the privilege to work with Keith Boniface. If he comes to your school, please tap into this source of knowledge. So, Greg, I will tell you that Keith and I worked together at my favorite school in the Middle East, and we worked together for just a little under 7 years, I want to say. Keith was my middle school principal when I first entered American International School in Muscat. And then he went to the high school, and I was still secondary, so I was still working with Keith. We had a great conversation 2 years before I left Oman. We had a great conversation about going into administration. And so that's when Keith became my mentor and helped me become, step foot on the path of becoming a principal. So I have Keith. Keith, I have you to thank for this.
So do me a favor, Keith. I know that JP knows you, and our listeners and I, most of us don't know you, Your Excellency. Can you give us an elevator version of international teaching and how you got into it? You can go back as far as you want to.
Okay, that's a good question. A good starting point too. I grew up in Southern California, and my first 2 years of teaching were in an inner city school in LA. And it was the kind of situation where I don't think you're geared for success in those situations, where I had a very large classroom. I taught 5th grade. You were expected to do everything in a classroom, from art to PE and music and all of those different things. Anyway, I'd heard about international schools, and this is back in 1977. So this is before job fairs and before it was well known at all. And somebody at the placement office at my university handed me a book of international schools, and I opened it up to the middle, and it opened on Libya, and a school called Tripoli. It was called the Oil Company School, a very clever name. And they. I thought about Tripoli, and I knew that I had no idea where it was. I knew that the song said there were the shores of Tripoli, so I thought it had beaches. So I applied. And back in those days, you wrote a letter, and a couple of weeks later, I got a letter back, and then soon after that, a telegram. And the head of the school offered to meet me at a hotel near the LAX. What the heads of school did back then is they flew to international airports, and they called people to come and meet them in their hotel room.
Wow.
I wasn't going to go because I was pursuing a mountaineering course, and it was the same weekend that I was finishing up this mountaineering course. And when I told my mom about it, she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm just not going to show up to this interview." And she said, "Well, you call and you tell them that you're not going to show up." So I called this John Monson, and I told him that first of all, I asked him, I said, "Could I meet with you on Monday?" That I was doing a mountaineering course on the weekend. And he said, He said, "Young man," he said, "I've traveled 5,000 miles to give you possibly the opportunity of a lifetime. If you have those to squander, more power to you." And I said, "Oh, wait a minute. Can we pretend this call didn't happen?" And he said, "I can if you can." I went to this interview completely depressed about having to show up and interview for something I knew nothing about. And as I walked in, there were four other teachers there, or candidates, and one of them handed me a yearbook and they said, "Have you seen this school?" And I said, "No, I don't know anything about it." And she handed me the yearbook and I flipped open a couple of pages and I thought, "Oh my goodness, it's a real school." And just then he came down the stairway and he said, "Looking for Keith Boniface?" And I said, "I'm your guy." Anyway, that's a long story for how one decision changed my life, because I ended up, going to Libya. I taught kindergarten in fourth grade in Tripoli and was evacuated 3 times from the country. The last time was when Reagan asked us to leave in 1981, and they took really good care of us. We stayed on to finish the semester. The entire staff, American staff, left. They hired a whole new staff of Canadians to take our place. And we traveled around the world, 4 of us, and applied for jobs all over the world. And that was the start of my career overseas. I spent 39 years in international education. So
How many schools would you count off, like off the top of your head, were you at then over your career?
I was at 7: Libya, Egypt, Germany, Ecuador, Belgium, Malaysia, Oman, and Jordan. 8 different schools, eight
That's
different countries.
it? 8 schools in 39 years? I thought you were going to tell me 100 or something.
No,
Well, that would be no exaggeration,
when
but
I was going to do this 10-year plan, and then go back to the States like a lot of people, think they're going to do. And when I finished, I went 4 years in Libya, 2 years in Egypt, and then 4 years in Dusseldorf, and I met my wife there. And we wanted to go to South America. And so we went to Ecuador for 2 years. And I think somewhere in there you make a decision as to whether or not this is just going to be a phase or your lifestyle. And I think 5 years is a big turning point, and 10 years is another big turning point. And we went to Belgium and Antwerp International School, and we ended up staying there for 14 years. That was fantastic.
I
Yeah.
have 1,000 questions for you.
yeah, I want to hear, Keith, can you run down the different roles you've had? Because I think Greg will be amazed to hear like the different roles. Would you be able to sort of kind of go through them?
Yeah, I wrote them down so that I would.
Excellent. I knew you were going to be prepared.
I was an elementary school teacher. I taught kindergarten, fourth and fifth grade, and then in my first 3 schools. And then I went to Germany to open a middle school. So I taught sixth, seventh, and eighth grade for 4 years there. In Ecuador, I taught math in middle school and high school. And from there, I was hired as an admissions director at Antwerp International School and a math teacher. So I did both of those. Oh, I skipped one. When I was in Germany, the last year I was there, I was the athletic director for a year, athletic director. In Belgium, I was the admissions director, and then I became the assistant elementary principal, and then the elementary principal. And they started a middle school, so I became the middle school principal there. And then I went to Malaysia, the International School of Kuala Lumpur, as the middle school principal, and then to Oman as the middle school principal. So most of my career, I had 12 years as a middle school principal, and then the last 4 years as a high school principal. And I was a coach and an accreditation chair. That's a
Isn't
topic
that
I'd love
isn't that
to talk.
amazing, Greg? Well, we are going to talk about that. We're going to do a deep dive on accreditation because Greg, I don't think we've ever had an episode about accreditation and the benefits of being on an accreditation team.
No, we haven't. I'm still in awe of this list. I give you, before we get into that, Keith, let me just piggyback on your experiences. I've been to 7 schools already, and I've been between elementary of different grades to all of elementary grades as a specialist, then back into the homeroom at upper elementary, and then back in as specialist and director of technology in there somewhere. So I've done a lot of hats, but not as broad as your 39 years, of course. But Wow, that's amazing. And it's a lot to be said to stay at a school for a long time. My
Mm.
resume was very much 2 year commitment, and then three, and then one, and then four. And I'm up to almost 7.5 at my current school. So there were some certain incentives for that. I'm just literally amazed. And it's so cool to hear the different places and roles that you've been in. You've got so much to talk about. I'm going to calm down a little bit and let Jacqueline get into the accreditation with you, because that is a really important talk that we need to have.
Yeah,
So
Keith,
take it away.
can you step back and tell us when that started and how you got on that path?
Well, the international schools is in always in need of educators to work through accreditation, and it's fairly important because international schools can fly up overnight and just slap the label international on them, and there needed to be some way of seeing if these schools were doing what they said they were doing. And so ECIS, which is now CIS, it used to be the European Council of International Schools, but now it's CIS. They started with accreditations, but a lot of schools used American accreditation associations. Especially the New England Association of Schools and Colleges has a very good reputation for doing accreditation visits as well.
I've also heard of MSA and WASC, so Middle State and Western.
And
Western
ASA.
Association of Schools and Colleges.
So yeah, our listeners can kind of look up international accreditation associations. There's quite a few. But how do you
Right.
get in the teams?
Most of the organizations have trainings that you need to do. Once you go through the training, then if you're a teacher, and they do need teachers to do this, they're not just administrators. In fact, prefer to have teachers do a lot of this. Then once you've done the training for it, they may call you and you go to your administrator and you ask for the time off. And schools are supposed to do this. They're supposed to allow faculty members to go. They're usually a week long. Probably some of the best professional development you can do. You get to see and really analyze another school, and the protocols now they've developed over the years, and I think they've gotten better and better. It's a lot of work. It's a real lot of work. You don't get a lot of sleep, and you have to be a fairly good writer. I think that would be one of the number one criteria, you know.
And as far as I know, a reader as well, because you're reading policies and procedures and curriculum,
Right.
and you're going through a lot of documentation, aren't you?
Yes, and you start with the school's mission statement. You analyze that, and they say that their school is about so and so, and then you're trying to verify that, for them. And for a school, it's great. I mean, except for the expense, it costs a lot of money to fly in a team of people from around the world. So normally, I did accreditation visits at schools that were close to me. So when I was in Europe, I went to Paris and Switzerland and Portugal and Turkey and Hungary. And as a retired person on the North America, I've been to Panama and Buenos Aires, but sometimes they need you anywhere, Vietnam or it's kind of, as a retiree, it was fun to do because I would just tag another week on. It was a great way to see the world, through accreditation visits.
And so it sounds like you're still doing that, or you still got a foot in that door?
When the pandemic hit, they started doing virtual accreditation visits. And I couldn't see, Greg, I would have the same reaction that it was, he nodded his head. It's difficult to, see a school via a camera lens. And so I stopped doing them for a while. I was also working that year. I did do an accreditation that visit that year in Dubai, but
Well, that was born out of necessity, right? And that was a one off. If they're still continuing that to cut costs, I would disagree with that, of course. But I know that part of the accreditation, you're going to visit the school and you're looking at everything from the student body to the staffing to the administration. As a whole organization, you're looking at those schools. And I'm glad that we're talking about this, because as a staff member, I've been a part of accreditation teams. It's like you're going into a different realm when you start getting involved with the Accreditation Association. And it almost sounds like a great thing for a staff member to do, a teacher to do, to build up a resume along the way, right? Not only is it good for the school to be a part of that, but in the future, other schools that you go to might be interested in that. But I'm not really sure about that.
no, I totally agree with you, Greg. I think it is professional development. It's one of the best hands-on you can do. And of course, you get your name. I don't know if this is totally legitimate, but we've hired accreditation visitors before because you get to know them quite well. You get to see their insights into how they're looking at your educational program, or even mundane things. How you do a fire drill, safety features of the school. It's just really it's a great experience. Yeah, I'm going to promote that.
It's interesting to know as a new teacher or just somebody thinking about international that's going from their home country that the schools are put through the rigors of things like that, like safety and student wellness and staff wellness and the whole organization, like you've mentioned those details, that they go through that with a microscope to get their reaccreditation. And it's a process that schools go through over a number of years, and they have to re-up, just like our teacher licenses or our administrator licenses. The school as an organization, that's why every website you go to has, for an international school, they will have it tacked on there somewhere that they're part of IRCOS or they're part of the IBO or they're part of, you name it.
Right.
You want to look for a school as a candidate or looking at schools around the world. You want to look for schools that do have an accreditation because that's their stamp of approval that they're going to a school that's worth it as a staff member, right?
Yeah, tip for new teachers in your interview: ask who the school is accredited through, because you don't necessarily want to come from a school that hasn't been accredited. I mean, that's not going to help your resume as much as coming from a school that has at least does have accreditation. They might say, oh, well, our accreditation's in process or something like that.
Maybe reaccreditation, right?
Oh, great.
I'll tag on to that and just say if you're going to the website and you don't see an accreditation logo at the bottom, usually it's at the bottom of a school website. If you're not seeing that and you're interviewing with them, then please, yes, be sure to ask, are you in the process of going through any kind of international accreditation? And if at that point they are stammering, I would strongly deter you from stepping into that realm because they haven't been vetted. But if you see the icon or the logos, then yeah, please ask about it and say, where are you in your accreditation journey? Because they might be reaccrediting that year and that might entail a lot of work for you. I always loved when they say, oh, we just reaccredited last year. And then you're good for 5 years, or maybe 3 or 4 years. You're off the hook. You won't be writing reports or hosting an accreditation team.
If I'm a new candidate for a school, I guess the idea is not that you have to know about all these accreditation agencies, like the nitty-gritty. We just need to know as a candidate that these words are out there, that there is a accreditation of some sort, and we might know a few of the acronyms, but it's hard to keep track of those. I would say it's just in your tool belt. It's just to be aware that the international schools that have accreditation, so you can get that in your conversation, right? If I'm not mistaken. Good. That's what I've been doing for like 20 years. So thank you for making sure that I did it right.
So we're not going to get into name calling or a ranking system of any kind for these accreditation systems.
Right.
But can you, Keith, talk to us about maybe some commonalities that you see? Because I think you've been on several different accreditation teams. Can you talk to us about what are some of the things that the accreditation teams are looking for in a school of quality, so that our candidates can kind of benefit from your experience of stepping into a school and immediately you can say, this is a school of quality because A, B, C, and D, if I'm not putting you on the spot.
That is a tough one to answer, but there are some new protocols, and CIS, which was the biggest one, and NEASC, the other organization that I've worked with, are working really hard to make the accreditation process meaningful. They're trying to get away from a checklist approach to doing that, even though some things need to be checklisted. You have to have the safety features in place. The only time that I was on a team that didn't, that completely, the accreditation failed was because of financial reasons. And that should never happen. The school should have never gotten that far into the process to say, oh, well, by the way, we don't have enough money to pay the salary of our teachers for the rest of the year. I mean, that was, appalling that it had gotten that far. My experience is what they're trying to focus on now is what's going on in the classroom. All schools are about learning. How can we look at the learning that's going on in the classroom? And that requires a certain level of training. You need people that can walk into a classroom and see what a teacher is doing well, and identify, yeah, learning strategies. It's not easy. It's difference between, a bunch of kids sitting and listening. They might just be waiting, or what are they doing, and how are they demonstrating their knowledge. So that's it. I mean, that to me is one of the best things that has come out of recent things. We used to spend a lot of time looking at staffing as well to make sure that teachers were teaching in areas that they were certified to teach in.
So that would be examining their diplomas and their degrees to see if they had the education, the experience, and the background that was required.
Right, right. Which is important. And I'm going to speak candidly here. A lot of
Sure.
schools would hide a bad teacher in the ESL program, because they couldn't fire him. I worked in Europe for 18 years, so you can't fire somebody. So the best place to put them is in ESL, and that's not right, to do that. But the kids are going to learn English eventually anyway. So that's what happened in some schools. And so we would check on, to see if their support staff did have the right kind of training. If you have a resource team, do they have the right credentials to be teaching and those kinds of things? Again, I don't know that a credential always makes you the best person for that job. That you could have a great, XYZ teacher that doesn't have the right piece of paper behind them. So it's more important, I think, what's going on in the classroom itself.
Have you gone to a school where they choose which teachers that they want you to go observe, and they hand you a possible dog and pony show of their best? Or do you get to, like in your experience, were you able to sort of say, hey, I'd like to go into this classroom and just pop in, or check with the teacher first and you choose the teacher? I don't know if that's a fair question or not.
That's a fair question, but every accreditation
It's
chair,
different.
yeah, goes into the school saying that, by the way, you're an open book right now. We get to do what we're going to
Oh,
do. Yeah, 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 everything has
carte
to be.
blanche. Like we're
It
going to
is.
come in and investigate, and we don't want to hide anything, so we're just going to come in there, and you give us permission to go and look in the nook and crannies that we think are important. That's
Yep.
really good to know, and that's empowering to know that you're doing that. You as an accreditation team are doing that, right?
Yeah, and it's not to be a gotcha. I mean, I don't
No,
think there's any
you
team
see
that
the
wants
good
to.
stuff.
Yes, exactly. But you're going to run a fire drill, and they know that. They know you're going to run a fire drill, and they're going to see how well the school performs on that sort of thing. But there, nothing is off limits. If there's counseling going on, you're not going to sit in while somebody's being counseled about something.
Oh, no
But there are.
way. Yeah.
But you do need to look at finances. You need to look at, yeah, every teacher. And in fact, the schools are sometimes insulted if you don't get to every teacher. We very often we have the whole faculty list on a room that you're working in, and when you've seen a faculty member, then you check the list to make sure that we're not all going to the same person, that we're hitting all of the faculty. So
I've always enjoyed having the accreditation team come and being, I almost felt like awarded, like somebody wanted to come and see me teach, and I guess that's just my nature. I have an open door policy. Anybody can pop in and evaluate me anytime, because I feel like as a quality teacher, you're doing it no matter what every day. You've got your A game, and you might have a bad day, and if they see your bad day, you should be able to explain why. Yeah, it's really neat to hear these insights from your point of view on a team, because I've seen a lot of teams come and go through different schools, but the candid conversation about the accreditation is very powerful.
Yeah, I want to switch hats here for a second because I really did want to talk about accreditation, not having heard a lot about it. But we also have the benefit of a veteran high school and middle school principal here in our guest, and he hinted at it with the accreditation. He talked about good teaching. So I would love to hear, Keith, if you have some kind of a shopping list for our listeners out there of what does a good teacher look like to you? Because I know that I learned off of you during my mentorship with you. What does a good teacher look like to you?
Everybody wants
Wow.
to answer that question. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we all do, don't we?
just make it easy on me, Jacqueline. All right,
We're
Just a
not
light
holding any
question.
punches. We're not holding any punches here. No, because I know that. I mean, there are just certain qualities. We talked about it during my episode, Greg, about what does the international ideal candidate look like? You know, what does an international teacher that wants to go overseas? What does that look like? And we talked about characteristics. We talked about background and education, but I feel like there are going to be some similarities, right? There are going to be some crossover there.
So Alfie Cohen has a book that I think it's called What Does Good Teaching Look Like? I have it downstairs. He addresses that question quite a bit. One of the biggest challenges for me as an administrator was that I was going to have to evaluate teachers. And after I got my master's in instructional supervision, I didn't feel qualified to do that. And so I went through the principals training course, which I'm going to highly recommend, run by Bambi.
PTC.
Yes, and I took the instructional supervision courses and eventually wound up teaching those courses as well. I think the biggest role for an administrator is to know what good teaching looks like, and to be able to relate that to teacher if they can't relate it to you. So you talked about a dog and pony show, and a lot of times I think people think that's what a lesson observation should be. You should have some dog and pony show ready to go. And people ask me, they said, "Are you worried about that if you're gonna watch a lesson that's just a dog and pony show?" And I said, "Absolutely not. If some teacher is going to do a lesson that they've rehearsed, I need them to identify why it's good and what they could have done better, because the perfect lesson hasn't been taught yet. And if they're just doing something, if they're teaching the kids something that they already know, that's not a very good lesson." And I've witnessed those lessons before, where you stop and you say, "How'd you know the answer to the question?" And the kid will look at me and they'll say, "Well, we did this yesterday because we knew you were coming."
No way.
Blew the whole cover. Yes, that
Oh, you
actually
got to
happened.
love the honesty of kids, right? Out of the mouths of babes.
No, I'm not amazed by that. I'm amazed that the teacher did that. I mean, it doesn't even cross my mind, Keith, and I'm not just saying that to, impress anybody. I'm just saying I've never thought that way.
It's easy to have a skeptical picture of a classroom observation because so many of them are done so poorly. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to become an administrator was to do that better. I had many principals that came in to observe me, but I learned by poor examples, where I was doing a really wonderful lesson and they said, at the end of the lesson, they came to me and they said, "Do you ever change your bulletin boards?" And I said, "That's the feedback I'm getting from the lesson I just prepared," or you probably both have similar experiences like that. Whereas, if somebody comes in and, notices, this is what you're doing well, or they can help the teacher identify what they've been doing well and what they could have done better is a much more valid experience.
Keith, I had an observation my first year of teaching, and I loved my principal. She was the one that hired me, and I stayed for 3 years. But I'll never forget it. One of my observations, she came in, it was just like a checklist. There were 10 things on there. And there was a comment like professionally dressed or some stupid like that. I was wondering like what she thought of mine. She gave me the checklist and didn't debrief me or anything. And on there it said something like I had to check against me because I was wearing capri pants. And I'm like, I was in Honduras. It's like there's fans, there's no air conditioning, there's slat windows. I'm sweating from my knees down on my pants, through my pants. So one year I bought some capri, the girls used to wear capri pants. I would wear the short-legged pants, khakis with a tie and a white shirt, and I got jagged on that. And I was like, where's the teaching evaluation and stuff? I love her dearly, and she's many years retired, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I love the fact that you want to sort of unburden a professional administrator from that kind of a checklist of the remedial stuff, right? And look at the learning that's going on. See if there's light bulbs above those kids' heads and what's the teacher doing. I would imagine those are things that you're looking at. And I don't know, I could talk forever about it, but that's just my opinion as a teacher, not as a admin. So
Yeah. teaching is an art and it's a science, and
Yes, and a passion.
I hope Jacqueline could vouch for the fact that I would observe her sometimes formally, but many times, most of the times informally, just kind of a pop in to see what she's doing. Partially because she's an excellent teacher, and it was fascinating to watch somebody so good at their craft. And I'm learning as I'm watching her. So yeah, it's a two-way
No, I
street.
remember those moments where, and in fact, I actually remember taking the PTC course on observation, evaluation, and supervision, I think it's called. They were talking about putting the reflective voice in the teacher. If you don't have a reflective teacher, which I think is kind of the definition of a good teacher, if we just needed like two words, it was like reflective teacher, because the person that thinks about how to improve, what are the kids learning, what could I have done better, what did I do that was a good thing, like not just looking at negatives but also looking at positives. How did I get the kids to that point? This is a reflective teacher. But how do you make a teacher reflective if they're not already doing it? And so that I found that course was really interesting to say, how do we put the reflective sort of supervisor voice inside all our teachers so that they become better?
It's like a
Right.
science experiment almost. I always remember in biology or in chemistry and stuff, it wasn't whether you succeeded with your experiment, it was how could you do it differently and what were your downfalls and your peaks and how did you succeed and if you didn't, what would you do differently? All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all four of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITPXpats. That's with an S. ITPXpats is our handle.
All right, and thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners, and though we're not monetized, we are here for you, and we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show. Both of you have mentioned the PTC. Could you tell just a little bit about it, what it is and what it stands for?
Yeah, sorry to use the acronym. It's the Principals Training Center, and it's for teachers who are aspiring to go into an administrative role, and they have a series of courses that are usually held during the summertime. And for me, the best possible professional development, because when I took courses in the States, they were usually geared toward a state. Like I took an instructional supervision course in Vermont, and it was way different from what I got from the international from the Principals Training Center. It's run mostly by international educators. There's a high degree of quality to their courses. And once I took the courses, I said, this is an organization I really want to work for, and eventually I did.
If I'm not mistaken, it's really good because in my opinion, from my experience, a lot of international schools like to hire from within, meaning that they like to push teachers into assistant principal and move them up, and sometimes they stay, sometimes they're groomed to go. But it sounds like a very powerful resource and a PD for anybody aspiring to get into admin that's in a school right now, instead of going back to get their master's degree even, is to really look at something like the PTC as something along the way that they should really be a part of.
So the PTC, the Principal Training Center, was some of the best PD. I mean, I actually would say it was the best PD I've ever had. I took 4 courses over the course of, I think it was about 3 or 4 years. You can take a couple courses a summer. to a maximum of 2, but you can take 1, for example, every summer to work towards your International School Principal Certificate. What I loved more than the PD, although that was fantastic, was the connections and the networking that I made, because every course had 40 participants, and every day they would rotate the tables. So they would always rotate your seat. You never knew where you
Like
were
a
sitting.
mixer. Yeah.
Yep. And you were sitting with heads of school, principals, coordinators. So, like some of the IB coordinators, MYP, PYP, they were there. You were assistant principals. I mean, I even sat with owners, school owners would come to these things to sort of know a little bit more about the international world. Maybe they were on their way to getting accredited. And I still have photos of those sheets, and they're on my LinkedIn. Like I purposely kept the sheets with all the contact information of every single person in the course and reached out to them and grew my professional network thanks to PTC, because every summer you would meet 40 people. But then there's more, because the other course was happening at the same time and you would eat lunch together, you would mingle, and I got my hands on their sheet and their contact information, and I would reach out to them and say, hey, while you were taking finance, I was down the hall, but we sat and we ate lunch and we talked about this particular thing. And so you get to know people. I got jobs thanks to PTC, and the connections I made there. So I think that is something we want to also highlight for our listeners.
This vision in my mind right now, listeners, is this is a dating game for admin internationally, and it's like, move on to the next person. It's hilarious, but I'm really interested. I want to go there just to meet people instead of becoming an admin, because I'm never going to be an admin, Keith. I will never go into admin again. I was a tech director once, but I'm not doing that again. I'm staying with the kids.
I don't know, Greg. I hear you. I never became a director because I felt like it was too removed from the kids. But when I first became an administrator, my fallback was teaching. I just said I can always go back to the classroom. I love the
Nice.
classroom, and but I love being an administrator. I think it's a great job. I love being a principal. Yeah, it's fun.
And you were one of the, you were the best for me, but I know that anybody listening that has had you as an admin will say that you were one of the best, Keith, because you not only got to know us professionally, but also personally. Can we talk a little bit about the international community that happens at schools? Because we've talked about this, right, Greg? And I've heard you talk about it as well in other podcasts, where when you come into an international school, you're not just the admin or the teacher, but you're also the frisbee. What is that? What is the ultimate? You're the ultimate goal, scorer. You're the marathon runner with the marathon club or the outdoor club. Can you talk to us a little bit about all your interests outside of the classroom, but within the international school community?
So it was one of the things I was going to start with. It's one of the real bonuses of going into the international education is the instant community that you share. And it really smacks when you come back to the States and you realize that there's not that common purpose when you move back home to the States with the people that you work with. If you get hired into an international school, you have a community of people that you're going to get to know very, very well. It's a bit of a bubble, but they're going to be your professional colleagues, and they're also going to be your social colleagues. So, over the years, I've pursued almost everything that I like pursuing, which is usually running or sports or chess or who knows what, and it's true for all of us. I think we can find, acting. I love community theater, and a lot of international schools will have community theater options as well, or who knows? Yeah. It's a common purpose with a group of people that have come together, and they're usually very passionate about education. Otherwise I wouldn't have applied for this. And you're reaching into. I wrote my top 5 reasons for teaching overseas. So this is kind of.
Ooh.
Yes,
Oh, wait.
I love
Okay.
it.
Oh, can we play this as a game? I love games. All right, Greg.
Are
What do
we
you think?
guessing what his answers
Yes,
are?
we're gonna guess. We're gonna guess, and then let Keith talk to each point. But so one of the top 5 is the international school community and the fact that you work together and you play together and you support each other. You're each other's family and friends. Greg,
Yeah, he
can you
gave that
guess?
away.
Yeah, but can you guess another one on his top 5?
So there's 4 more,
Yeah,
right?
that's it.
All
Yeah,
right.
maybe.
Maybe. Okay, so ultimate frisbee's out of it. Okay. Well, it has to be part of it. We're teachers and admin first. We're educators first. But since you're international, travel has got to be on there.
So that's number 2. Not that there's a priority, but
Right.
you want to travel but not be a tourist. And
Yes.
there's
Oh,
a
Anthony
big.
Bourdain. There you go.
Was that his? Did I
That's his.
steal it from him?
Be a traveler, not a tourist. You didn't steal it from him, but you share the same quote, right?
Yeah, when you live in a place, it's far different from visiting the place, and that's really richness of getting to know a culture, getting to know what their priorities are. I think that you would agree, both of you, that that's one of the real joys of being an international educator.
How many countries do you think you've been in, Keith? Like travel through?
67. I actually keep track of it.
Yeah, I do too. Well, we all do, right? That's part of it. They're traveling, right? All right, here comes JP Mint. How many do you have, JP?
I turned 50 last year. I just turned 51, but when I was approaching the 50th birthday, I started to panic because I thought, have I hit 50 and 50? And I did a list. I am counting East Germany as number 51 because I went there before the border reintegrated. So East Germany was 51 in 50 years. So I was really happy with that because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to get my passport renewed, or get on a plane somewhere to a new country if I'm at 49 and I'm 50 years old.
I hit 70, and that's pretty good. I mean, most of that was as an international teacher. Some of it was before, but I won't count things like going through Amsterdam and say I've been to Amsterdam. I was at the
No,
airport. I won't
airports
do
don't
there.
count.
And
Yeah,
Korea
let's
is
talk
out
about
of it.
that.
You have
So
to stay
airports
overnight,
don't count. Mm-hmm.
and you have to do a little bit of off the beaten track, right? That's just for me.
I say you have to eat. So I've been in Switzerland because I got off the train,
You
I
have to eat in
bought
Switzerland.
something, I ate, and then I got back on the train. I count that
Oh, I
as
don't.
a country. You
Keith, don't
don't.
you? No, because like Keith, I think you have to stay overnight in the country before you can actually. Keith, do you agree or no?
Was it an overnight train? Was it
Yeah.
the
Oh,
Orient
yes.
Express?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I
now
mean,
we're splitting hairs.
you're not overnight in Switzerland because
You
it
didn't
takes all
see
of what, a couple of
Switzerland?
hours.
You
No,
didn't
but
see
you
it?
do. And I think the minute that
Tourist.
you've spent money. I mean, I spent $20 on a sandwich. Like I can speak to Switzerland and its prices
All
because
right,
of
I'll give
that.
you that. Okay.
Oh, okay. So that's
But
probably a half a sandwich then, right? It's only 20 bucks.
Travel. Yeah, half a sandwich
okay,
for
so
20.
travel. So let's recap. We got travel. We've got the international school community, sort of a ready, set family. I think on that list, Keith, we just touched on it. I think professional development as a teacher, when we head overseas, we get such quality professional development, and sometimes it's paid for. One of my masters was paid for by my international school. They sent me to California and I got a master's in French in 3 summers, thanks to a school in Turkey that sent me, because they want staff members that have master's degrees. They can then say, 70% of our staff have masters. You just need to sign on a couple more years. So is that one of your top 5?
I said it a little bit differently, just because I was doing the comparative view of coming from the States, and that is that you go to international schools to do what you were trained to do. In other words, you have no excuses in international schools. You're going to teach well, and that's, I mean, I'm not saying this very well, but when I was in the States, I felt like I was a disciplinarian, or I was filling out forms, or I was doing a lot of things that didn't relate to teaching. When you go overseas, you're definitely going to use all of the professional development you can, that you've learned, and all that you can assume more. I think that if you love teaching, go to international schools, because you're going to be able to teach well.
When we're little girls and little boys and we're dreaming of this career called teacher, we're going to the core of what a teacher is when we go international, and we're making that inner child happy because we're finally doing what we were meant to do on this planet, right?
You said that much better than I did.
Nice segue. That's a segue into my next point on your list. And maybe it's
Ooh.
not on yours, but in the top 5 for me, the number one reason for staying overseas and making a career is respect as being a teacher. So I don't know if you had it on your list, but is it on your list?
It's not, and it should be. Yeah.
Oh, well, then you could add it. You have my permission. I'll ask Anthony Bourdain too. No, wait, you can't do that.
So mine were kind of off the cuff. I'll go give you the last.
Well, wait, I have one more guess, but
All right.
I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive this is not on your list,
He's your
because I know
mentor.
because I know Keith, but I'm going to say finances, because I think our listeners need to know that I am retired in Mexico. He's giving me a thumbs up, everybody.
I am.
I'm retired in Mexico at 50 years old because of my international teaching career. I was able to save a lot of money. I was able to invest it thanks to Andrew Hallam and Mark Zorel. And I think we need to be very open and honest about it. This is a fantastic way to see the world, but also get paid to do it, because we're getting our apartment paid for. There's so many benefits.
So I said one of the top 5 reasons, I said generally you're looking to be more financially independent is the way I worded it. And
Awesome.
for Americans, it's the tax benefit. Very often it's the housing benefits. It's the lack of travel costs, because schools, take care of a lot of that thing. The other thing that people really do need to think about is the retirement considerations. I know that a lot of schools will just pay you as you leave. What's that called?
Like an end of service bonus.
An end of service bonus or something like that, yeah, that they give you. Whereas we're receiving a pension from Belgium now and from Germany,
wow.
because that just when you're in Europe, you're automatically paying into the
Yeah, I got one
retirement.
for Switzerland. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
fantastic.
really nice. Yeah. So yes, I think it's generally speaking, it's definitely a bonus to have taught over. Now, if you go to places like the Middle East or
China is another one.
China pays well. Even Switzerland, I think, pays pretty well, didn't they, Greg?
It did. It was but it was a cost benefit type of thing.
Yeah,
That you go to Europe for the lifestyle, not necessarily for the money, and
Yeah.
That's a tricky question, right? It depends on the person and their spending and their thriftiness or their savings and all that. And
Cost of living, local
thank
cost
you.
of living. Yeah.
Yeah,
That kind of segues into the fourth
the
one I had
last
there.
one. Yeah.
Well, you're looking for quality of life and not just a higher standard of living.
Oh,
Balance.
I can't believe we forgot balance, Greg.
Balance,
That
yeah.
that is so huge. The life work balance overseas is, bar none, I think, one of my top 2 reasons to go
So
overseas.
Keith, explain that. That's at the top for you.
I'm not trying to knock people that live and work in the United States, but to me, it seems like you're on a constant quest here in the States to have a higher standard of living. You want a 2-car garage, not for your cars, but for the stuff you own. And you're constantly moving, to get more things, and in the US, you have bigger refrigerators and bigger washer and dryers and all those. And to me, that's a high standard of living. But overseas, you may not have that. I was listening to a podcast where you talked to somebody said, "Oh yeah, we didn't have a dryer in Italy. We just hung our pants," and that kind of stuff. But the quality of life in international schools, for me, mostly was just immeasurably better. We lived in Europe for a long time, but also for the Middle East. I love the Middle East, and I love the richness of life there, a better work balance. I worked in Asia as well, where that life balance is not as evident. It was very frenetic pace there, but that's the way the society is there too. But
Here's one of my questions. I promise I might throw you a couple blindsided questions, but one of my favorites, of course, and JP knows this, is I like to ask our listeners, of all the places you've been and taught and lived, are there 3 things maybe that you always take with you? And for example, JP always brings her carpets with her, and I always need to have a maid of some sort, because that's part of the joy of living overseas. I had a maid, and nobody I knew in the States was a teacher with a maid. right? Are there 3 things that you like to have or take with you when you go to each country or place that you live?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I never went home, so everything always came with me, with me and my wife. We just dragged, and it grew every time we went to a new place. I think, when in the interview, one of the things I used to always ask is there a place to run? If I go to,
That's great.
No,
Yeah,
that's
that's
I
part of your
mean,
passion. Your life
yeah.
is your balance is having a place to run.
If you want some help, it's like what makes your home home whenever you
Yeah.
step into your door. So whether it be Oman or in the South America or Europe, was there something tangible that made your home home?
God, I feel terrible not being able to edit this one out, okay? Because
I love it that you're stumped because you spent so many years overseas and you stayed in one place for 14 years. So, of course, your life was that was life and you couldn't nail it down to anything. But
Well, it speaks volumes.
yeah, I have 2 other things. I have to have transportation and I have to have ice. And they seem really trivial, but those are my comfort zone for where I live. I can live under a bridge, but I have to work. It goes without saying, I can live anywhere, but I have to work with great people at a great school because that's my life. It's not where I'm living because there's a joy of little differences everywhere around the world and big differences. But for me, it was really like the little thing was just a little bit of ice for my drinks, keep my beer cold, and a maid that would do the ironing for me. And I needed to have my own transportation because I've gone through that route where the school bus brings you to school and you're late and they're on their time. You don't have to answer the question because it's fair enough that you have to have a place to run. And that speaks volumes right there, right?
yeah, I just, I
Here's an easier question. Do you know what I'm going to ask him, JP?
Yeah, actually, can I ask? Because
Yes,
now
that's why I
I get a
asked you.
turn. All right. So, Keith, we have a tradition here on ITP. We love to hear people's police stories. And we would like to know if you have a police story, or it could be an airport customs story or something like that. Have you got one?
I do, and I thank you for the forewarning on that because a lot of most of my police encounters happened in my 20s when I was living in Tripoli, thankfully. And Tripoli had a very unique sense of law and order. For example, if you were illegally parked somewhere, the police would come and they would slash 2 of your tires. They didn't slash, they stuck a knife in 2 of your tires.
What?
And that's your fine. That's your fine. And it is so incredibly effective, because you come to your car and you have to have it towed. And they always do 2 on the same side so that you have to change a tire and put it in the back so when it gets towed away. And you will not park there again.
Holy
And
cow.
people see them doing this, and it's incredibly effective. Doesn't generate any income for them, but the tire repair people love
Oh my
it.
gosh, the
Did it
tow
happen to
trucks.
you?
No, my car story. They ticket cars. They don't ticket drivers. When I bought my car, it had 2 tickets on it. I did not know this. But I apparently broke another law. I ran a stop sign or something like that. And the police came to my house one night and they said, we need to take your car to jail. And I said, what? And they said, we need to take your car to jail. It has 3 tickets on it. It's a bad car. They said it better in Arabic than I'm doing right now. They were impounding my car because my car had 3 tickets on it. I said, I've only had it for a couple of weeks. And they said, oh, when you buy a car, you're supposed to check and see if that has any tickets on it. And I said, I have never heard of such a thing.
Wow.
But that was back in 1978, 79, and that was the way they
That's impressive
made
that they
sure.
even had the bureaucracy to be able to track that kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
Here's a story, and you looked at going to Venezuela at the school I taught. It was at CPLIC. This is a car theft story. I had a little Ford Fiesta, and I had bought it from some other teachers. They passed them along. You buy from someone that's there already. And this car had only had me as an owner and the people before me. One night, my buddy, a local friend of mine named Ruben, had come over and we were just hanging out, and we had gone out with some ladies that night. He took them home back to the barrio. He comes back to my apartment at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and he sort of nudges me. He's like, Greg, wake up. And I'm like, what? He's like, your car got stolen. What? And they had held him up at gunpoint in the barrio. He had gone into a little store to get something to drink on the way back after taking the girls home. And it was frightening. He had to rely on me and let me know that I had to go to the police station with him that night, because in Venezuela, the police would blame somebody that's local. He was from the States, but he's also Venezuelan, and he was there on a Venezuelan passport. So they would look at him and say he's the one that stole it, or they wouldn't believe him. They'd put him in jail. So he told me the story. I went immediately down to the police station, and we called the school, because the school was our support system. The head security guy from the school met us at the police station, and we worked it all out. And I didn't get it back for another 6 months or so, because the police took everything else off of the car that was nailed down, and I had to pay to get it out of hock and out of impound, and it was in the middle of a field somewhere. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's a crazy story like yours, but I've never heard of anybody slashing tires. But I love sharing stories on this, and thank you for your police story, because we enjoy those more than anything. Yeah, JP's got something too.
So Keith, I want to ask you, do you remember every time we would exit Oman, and when we would scan our resident card and we would be told, oh, you have to go over to that desk, and we'd be like, why? What's wrong with my card? Oh, you have speeding tickets you have to pay for before you get to exit this country. No. This was everyone. Absolutely
really?
Everyone that was caught by camera, and so your car was caught speeding. So that's what got me thinking about it, because it was your car. It could be anybody driving it, but your car was caught speeding on camera, and you have a fine to pay, and they will not let you leave the country until you've paid those fines. Do you remember that, Keith?
Must be a
Yes,
Middle
I
East
do.
thing, because that's where I live right now. It's the same kind of thing. I can't even get an exit visa to get out of the country until it's paid off. So I didn't even think about that. You're right. It's the car's fault, or whoever had it before you. And since you pass them on from staff to staff, you have to make sure before you accept and buy that car. You learned a hard lesson, didn't you? You have to
I did.
clear out the history and get all the paperwork on that car before you actually purchase it.
But it made a great story.
Oh, I love stories. It does. It makes a great story.
Every time we make mistakes, every time we have misadventures, know down the road you're going to be telling this story in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, because that's part of the excitement about living overseas, is the mishaps. I mean, who wants to hear about how you had a wonderful vacation in such and such a place and absolutely nothing went wrong? No, everybody wants to hear all the crazy stories, all the mishaps and the twists and turns of living overseas.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that.
Well, I remember you were also saying before, maybe before the show, but we were talking a little bit about how you've had to been evacuated out of a country before. And on behalf of Kent, who is not here this evening, he has a story about how he had to go around a tank to get to school one day when he was down in Yemen. He and his wife were going to school, and they had to steer around the tank. And I'm like, what a wonderful story. I have to go back into the episodes and listen to that again, because it's crazy that these stories that all of us have from every little country and every school we've taught at or traveled to. It's just crazy how these stories. Thanks for sharing those, Keith. And JP, thanks for bringing up the whole car thing.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank Keith so much for, first of all, accepting my invitation to come onto the show. I reached out to him through Facebook and said, hey, Keith, is there any way we could ever get you on this show? And a true friend who has come through now so many times in my life, not only as a mentor, but now as a guest on ITP. I think our listeners have learned so much from Keith, having Keith on through accreditation, through, what is a good teacher look like, the administration hat, and then, also the top 5 or 6 or 7 reasons to go overseas. I think this was such a rich episode, and I really do want to thank you, Keith, for coming on.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you for making it so comfortable. I love the informality, and Your tagline is one of the best kept secrets, and I do agree with this. I'm a little bit wary that with your website and podcast, it's not going to be a well kept secret anymore. But still, it's one of those things that we do feel it's important to share. And thank you for doing the sharing, and thank you for asking me, Jacqueline. And it's just been a real pleasure.
Keith, I want to say some final words too. I want to make sure that you put this on your resume that you were a guest of our show, because the next 7 or 8 schools that you become an interim principal for, they'll want to get you just because of this podcast, right?
I'll have to pay a premium then. It's
True.
Finder's fee.
Yeah, you have to listen to 5 more episodes in order. That's the way you can pay us back. But we're not monetized, so it doesn't matter. You're one of a bunch of listeners that we have now, and I hope that we continue to offer such quality episodes like this one. By the way, we've reached over 20,000 downloads. We've been around for 2 years. We're at like 65 episodes by the time we publish this. And Keith, you've been a wonderful guest for our audience, and I hope we have another 100 countries added after having you on there, right?
And so we'd just like to ask, do you have any last words of wisdom or tips for our listeners that are maybe considering? So let's think about it. They're considering heading overseas. They're like you in Southern California, grade 4, grade 5 teacher, thinking, I don't know if this is for me. What could you say to convince them, or what could you say that would just maybe tip the scales in favor of international education?
I think a lot of people consider safety when they go overseas. I think that's one of the biggest fears that they have, and I would just say to them that it's a lot safer than they would imagine. I think that's very often I hear people say, "Oh, you went to Egypt? You went to live in Egypt? I would never live in Egypt." And they're like saying, "Well, I would never live in X, Y, or Z in North America." So a lot of fears are overblown in some of these places. Like Greg, I think you lived in Cambodia.
Yeah.
I bet that was fantastic. I just, the people are amazing, but it's got a kind of a checkered past.
So don't believe everything you see on CNN or the news channels.
Don't watch CNN. Watch other channels. Not to get a rich variety of news and
or the
like you said,
embassy pages. What are those things called?
I don't read
CIA.
Travel advisories.
No, those are terrible because and the funny thing is, don't tell my mom and dad where you're going to go live, because the first time I told them I was going to go to Honduras, my mom said, "You're going to die." Honestly. And the second thing my dad said in the same breath was, "Oh my God, they have great diving there," right? But they turn out, like you said, be cautious and be wary. Find out as much as you can about the places, but take the plunge. And some of those places that people think are dangerous can turn out to be the most wonderful experience for you, right, Keith?
Yeah, and I'll go back to the initial story I told about John Monson, who told me that he was going to offer me the opportunity of a lifetime, and if I had those to squander, it's the opportunity of a lifetime. So.
Thank you so much. Love it.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, I want to thank Keith, and I want to thank Greg, the single guy, and I'm JP Mint, and this has been an ITP podcast for the history books, everybody. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to our next guest.
That's well said.
Oh, yes.
I love it. And your excellency. I didn't get to call you that enough during the show.